Hello, friends, and welcome to What the Fringe, the podcast dedicated to all things Fringe theater. I'm your host, Lauren Hantz. Each week, I visit with a Fringe artist to hear all about their endeavors and gain insight into their process. Today's episode breaches some sensitive subject matters concerning sexuality and abuse. If this is something that is not for you at this time, please let this moment pass and we will catch you in our next episode. This week, I am visiting with Penny Sterling, whose most recent production is Mounting Washington. In February of 2008, the deeply closeted pre-transition person who would eventually become Penny Sterling decided to take up bike riding to get a little exercise. In August of 2008, they made the inexplicable decision to ride a bicycle up Mount Washington, the world's toughest bicycle hill climb. As an out-of-shape 40-year-old weakened bicyclist, Penny was understandably dubious. Nevertheless, she began training not only to be a better bicyclist, but how to do hard things, developing faith in her ability to feel the fear of being far outside her comfort zone and doing it anyway, learning sometimes, failing, but never losing faith. 3 years later, she rode the entire 7.6-mile, 12-degree incline road to the top, where an actual miracle occurred that almost killed her. Mounting Washington, the story of a mountain and a miracle, is a story of impossible events inspired by an even more improbable circumstances. It's a tale filled with struggle, doubt, and triumph, told with the trademark good humor and unflinching honesty audiences have come to expect from her. What's unexpected, however, is that she will be doing this entire show while riding a bicycle. Yes, really.
They are completely intertwined. My transition as a lilt, that's my acronym for myself, a later in life transitioner. And I'm trying to get that to be like kind of a thing so that I turn on, like I go to a social media website and see somebody talking about lilt and I'm like, yeah, baby, that's me. That's my legacy. I'm the lilter. So I'm trying to, like, my transition was what got me into storytelling. Well, I've always been a storyteller in one way, shape, or form. When I was in television, I was the storyteller, videographer, and shooter and editor because I would be able to tell these compelling stories, other people's stories. And so now I became the person, I was telling my story about myself. And I was able to incorporate my acting and I was able to incorporate my stand-up comedy and my ability to find compelling storylines in things.
Penny Sterling says serious things in a funny way, and sometimes vice versa. She's a storyteller and a comedian, a poet, an actor, depending on who's asking and why. She's written and performed solo shows, collaborative shows, TEDx talks, and even a couple of sermons because she never refuses stage time. Penny is also an adjunct professor at St. John Fisher in Rochester, New York, where she teaches public speaking. She's also a suicide crisis counselor for the 988 system. Penny was also not always Penny. In 2014, at 54 years old, Penny finally admitted to herself and then the world that she'd known since she was 8 years old, that she's transgender. And in 2015, after 2 decades of not acting or performing stand-up comedy, she was voted funniest man in Rochester in 1992. And no, the irony is not lost on her. Penny felt like she had some new material she'd like to try out. She soon discovered that she was sacrificing truth for laughs, so she decided to try storytelling instead. Besides, she was tired of not getting cast in any of those plays she auditioned for, so writing a show for herself felt like the best idea for her. That show was Spy in the House of Men, a one-woman show with balls, which she's performed nearly 100 times around the country. She's since written 2 other solo shows and 2 collaborations. She is currently performing Mounting Washington, the story of a mountain and a miracle, which won the 2025 United Solo Spring Festival Pride Award. Penny, welcome to What the Fringe!
Hi! Yay! We did it! We finally did it!
I know. Everybody just needs to buckle up because Penny and I are soul sisters and this may just be a bit of a wild ride. So we met in Rochester Fringe last year. I was just asking around because I needed some help and I was like, does anybody know anybody in Rochester? And multiple people were like, Penny Sterling. You need to meet Penny Sterling. And we connected. You were so kind to help do posters with me. And then I don't know. We just like hit it off.
Yeah, that first time we like emailed each other back and forth or texted each other back and forth, it was like we were a comedy team or something like that, where we were hitting each other's buttons, not even knowing it. And it was like, yeah, I can't wait. And then I remember, I think one thing that I said is, I really can't wait to meet you. And like, you rode your bike over to my crooked little house in Swilberg, and it was like, oh my God. And we were like hugging each other like long lost friends.
It was really fun. Let's talk a little bit about your journey as an artist. So you started a lot with like stand up, and then talk to me about how you learned you were more of a storyteller.
Storyteller is a great word for it. Another one would be liar. I lied about who I was for 54 years, and I had to create this persona. For a while, it was a real asshole. I was abusive and violent and mean and angry. And then my world blew up for a number of reasons, some of which were mine, some of which were other people's. And I had to rebuild from that. And I didn't think I was going to. I didn't care about it. But then I heard somebody say something that kind of woke me up. And so I said, I got to become the healthy person it was for my kids. And so I did that, and I got healthier and healthier and healthier, financially, socially, emotionally, and physically. I was trying to be the least toxic man I could be, but at a point I realized I had to get rid of more than just the toxic and toxic masculinity to actually be happy. And that's what I did. And that's when everything that I ever wanted to do in my life started happening to me. It was really interesting. One thing I did not want to ever do, which was admit that I was transgender, was what I needed to do in order to have the life that I always wanted. I love telling stories. I love being entertaining. I'm charming. I love interacting with people. I love making them laugh. I love making them think and feel. Originally I trained as an actor, but I was really bad because I considered emotion to be feminine. And I couldn't do anything feminine. So I could do like rage and I could do comedy. So, basically Oscar Madison or Stanley Kowalski, and everything else in between was out of my range. And so that's why I got into stand-up comedy, because I could just be a clown. And I was the typical angry, like 90s era angry dude kind of guy. And that was working for me. Then my life changed, and I became a news producer, which meant I had to work until like midnight, 5 days a week, and I couldn't go out and tour anymore. And so I put that away. Then all this stuff happened, and I transitioned. And at that point, my youngest daughter, all my kids were out of the house except for my youngest daughter, who was a junior in high school. She was really self-directed, could take care of herself, all these different things. So I said, I think I want to try stand-up comedy again. Is that okay? I think I got a couple of new stories that I can tell, new jokes that I can bring. And they're like, yeah. I just like, no, actually didn't say it. She goes, I don't care. So I did that, and I had a solid 5. But when you're starting out and trying to make it in comedy, if you don't get a laugh every 12 to 15 seconds, you're not going anywhere. And to do that, I had to lie, and I did not want to lie. And the other thing that was happening is because I transitioned and I was like on Facebook, I had a half century worth of friends and family that were like basically saying WT actual F to me. And I'm like, so ask me questions and I'll answer them for you. And they did. And I would answer with these relatively long multi-paragraph things you can do on Facebook. And people were like going, wow, that's great. This is good. You should write a book. And I'm like, I don't want to write a book, because a number of reasons. And I think one of the more powerful reasons is that reading a book, you're not in the room with a person. I really believe that being in the room with a transgender woman, listening to her, having her like coach you through what it's like to be transgender. I do everything that I can off the top to be endearing and charming and funny. Especially the first one I did, Spy in the House of Men. I was like, I really front-loaded the comedy on that thing. And then I started introducing like some of the elements that were scary and tragic and real. And I could tell right away as I was doing it that like the audience was right with me. And I'm like, this is powerful. This is necessary. The really cool thing, when Trump became president the first time, there was a woman comedian that I was friends with at the time who was doing a fundraiser for Planned Parenthood called Don't Grab My Pussy. And she was like getting all these women comedians to do comedy. And she asked me, and I said, I could do comedy or I could do this story. And I shared one of the stories from Spy in the House of Men, which is basically just like 6 different stories that I told about my life. And I sent it to her, and she said, you need to do that. It was called What's Normal Now, and it was about being sexually assaulted in a gas station at 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning in southwestern Pennsylvania while I was trying to get coffee, and how it terrified me and surprised me, and my life changed at that moment in a way that I was not expecting. And it involved my daughter, and it kind of made us closer. And the title is What's Normal Now because, like, we were in the car and I was like crying, and I told her what had happened, and she wasn't saying anything, but she like put her arms around me while I drove. I let this happen for a while until I've made a wisecrack to let her know that, things are back to normal. And then I said, but they weren't, and they never would be again. Or maybe this is what's normal. This is what's normal now. And I was telling that story in this bar. At about that point, I realized that there was no sound, and like everybody in the bar, and like there was like the one half of the bar was a stage, and the other half was like patrons coming in a bar, and there was always chatter over there. And I realized that every single person in that room was quiet and looking at me and hanging on every word and learning something and feeling something. That was such a formative moment in my life, and it helped me come up with the way I feel that I am most useful, and that is getting people to feel. Because I believe that everything, all of our decisions are, unless it's like some sort of mathematical equation or surgery or something like that, but our day-to-day decisions are never based on logic and rationality. It's always based on the stories and the emotions that we're feeling, and then we use logic and rationality to cover over the fact that this is, I believe that we need to protect our kids, which is why I don't want these men in women's sports or whatever. That sort of logic is just what a cover for the feelings. And the way the feelings inform our attitude informs our behavior informs our choices of what we do. And so it all goes back to the feelings, and the feelings are always informed by the story you tell yourself about something, unless you hear another story. The story that they're telling about me is that I am a predator and that I am a man in a woman's clothing and all these different things. And then I tell my story, and it affects them emotionally. And all of a sudden, that entirely different story is in their heart. So their feeling is different. So their attitude is different about trans people. It's like, they're not predators. They're just people trying to live. And their behavior is to stop spreading lies to make themselves feel comfortable. And their choices are to be allies, or to at least stop trying to marginalize people who are just trying to do the best they can.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that. I know we've talked about some of this just in our conversations, and so it's just always good to hear it again. But we were talking about you becoming a storyteller, and it sounds like that some of those opportunities to just get up in front of people and tell a story really made you realize kind of who you are as an artist. I mean, you're a wordsmith for sure, right? You love wordplay, and it is part of your charm. But even like you did right now, you just took us from laughing to like just a very deep place as you told your story.
They are completely intertwined. My transition as a lilt, that's my acronym for myself, a later in life transitioner. And I'm trying to get that to be like kind of a thing, so that I turn on, I go to a social media website and see somebody talking about lilt, and I'm like, yeah, baby, that's me. That's my legacy. I'm the lilter. So I'm trying to, like, my transition was what got me into storytelling. Well, I've always been a storyteller in one way, shape, or form. When I was in television, I was the storyteller, videographer, and shooter and editor because I would be able to tell these compelling stories, other people's stories. And so now I became the person, I was telling my story about myself. And I was able to incorporate my acting, and I was able to incorporate my stand-up comedy and my ability to find compelling storylines in things.
I know you are a very good storyteller. I would agree. Well, let's talk a little bit too, because I mean, you've done a couple of Fringes, and how did you find Fringe, going from the stand-up comedy world to the storytelling event that your friend did to then finding Fringe as like a place that was a good fit for you and the type of art that you do?
I had been doing Fringes a little bit in the before times. My comedy improv troupe went to the Toronto Fringe Festival the same year that SARS hit Toronto. I would do that, and I did a couple of things in the Rochester Fringe as well, but nothing like what I'm doing now. And so when I did Spy for the first time here in Rochester, I figured this was going to be a one-off. I had these two shows and I would do it, and that would be it. I did not expect that it would be as well received. In fact, like the very first time I did it, after I was done, I went into the dressing room and I was just standing there holding onto a counter and gasping. And the house manager came in and goes, you need to get back out there because there's a standing ovation going on for you, which really? And so I went out there, and it was so affirming. And at that time, I was also working in sports television, and that took up a lot of time. And we didn't do baseball where we were. We would do football and basketball and hockey. And so our summers were kind of like our fallow season. So I thought, I'm just going to apply to some Fringe festivals around the country. And I just went online. I was like, where are Fringe festivals? And I applied to Ithaca Fringe, which is no longer around. I applied to Cincinnati Fringe. I applied to Minneapolis Fringe, Toronto Fringe, and Capital Fringe in D.C. I got accepted into every single one except for Toronto or Montreal, which Canadian one. Every single one of them I was in. And I'm like, oh, great. Except how am I going to do this with my job? And wasn't God just so lovely to have my job be eliminated in March? I was in New York City because I had been nominated for an Emmy for one of my stories that I had shot. And 2 days before that by the way, this is your last day. So I basically spent the summer touring around, and I was meeting people and then meeting them again and then meeting them again. And I was like, this is kind of cool. I like this. And finding communities with people and making connections and really being welcomed and being, and all these different things, especially Cincinnati and Minnesota, they were just amazing. I was like, I like this. I want to do more of this. And there was I wasn't getting any full-time jobs. So yeah, that's what I would do.
I love that. And you've done so many really lovely things since then. So I know it's hard to kind of lose a career, but it gives you opportunities to do other really great things.
I'm grateful. I did not realize, because when I was working in television, it was I can't imagine myself doing anything else. I just love this so much. And then I realized there was a lot of stuff that I really didn't love about it. But I did love the storytelling. I did love the ability to be creative. That's really what I loved. And so then when I started doing this, I was like, I don't need to get behind a camera ever again in my life if I don't want to be.
Put me on the stage. Let me tell my story. It's not somebody else's.
Yeah, and when I'm behind a camera, I'm capturing beauty and I'm telling stories with my photos and all these different things, and I love it.
I love it. Well, let's talk about your show, Mounting Washington. That's the one that I have seen. I got to see that in Rochester last year. And you are on a bicycle. It's the training apparatus that people use. So you're not riding around the room.
No.
But you are it elevates as the show goes on, if it's working correctly. It's a really Beautiful story. It was very engaging. I mean, it's just an interesting story in and of itself. All the work that you had to put into it, the back and forth. I mean, there's so much, there's failure and success in it, which is something that people really connect with. And I'm not going to reveal it because it was literally jaw dropping, the miracle that happens at the end there. And it's so worth it. Like the whole story. Not that your story isn't worth it, but to get to that point of where you're going, it's really beautiful. So I think I could probably understand why you wrote the show, but tell me in your own words, like, why did you want to tell this story and how you tell it and all the different kind of components that are in it?
I had started telling it in real time while I was training. Way back before there was social media as we know it now, there were blogs, and I was blogging on this site called Uphill Rider. And it was about me training to go up Mount Washington. And I would, like, every day or as much as I could, like, track what was going on with me as I'm training, and just so many different things, like how many miles I rode, but also what the weather was like, what I noticed about it, all these different things that happened to me while I was riding. And I would ride all the time. If I could ride, if it wasn't like snowing and raining, I rode on Thanksgiving more than once. I rode on Christmas more than once. I rode on New Year's Day more than once. I remember one time on New Year's Day, I'm riding along and I get to a traffic light and and it's a red light, so I stop. And this car pulls up next to me, and this Karen in the car unwinds the passenger side window and says, "You shouldn't be on a bicycle." And I looked down and I went, "Oh, where'd that come from?" And it was fun. And like I was doing that, and everybody was expecting me to continue the story when I made it to the top, and they're like, "When are you going to tell?" Like, I'll get to it. And I couldn't tell the story. So I had a lot of it kind of in place for a while. The through message and the through point I couldn't really do because the climax, what I call the turn, was not something that I was prepared or able to talk about. That's why I didn't do it. And then, so after I wrote these other things, I was like, well, maybe I could try doing this story and see if that works. And it did.
It did. Well, because sometimes we're not ready to tell a story. And I would think as storytellers, my show's not very personal, but I think if I was telling a personal story, it would take a while. You have to process it to then be able to tell it appropriately.
Right. I would bet everything in my wallet against everything in yours that there's an awful lot of you and your life in that story.
Yes, because it came out of me dealing with a lot of baggage and all of that. So that is part of it. And then there's other people's stories in it. But yeah, you have to process it. And I'm still processing all of those things. Like I would think maybe you are as well. So, because that's life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's talk real briefly, because I know activism has now become a part of what you do as an artist, even though you're really a storyteller, but sometimes kind of unexpected things come up when we become artists. So tell me a little bit about how activism has become a part of what you do as well.
Well, it's more like people have applied the term activism to what I do, which I'm okay with. If people are paying attention to me, first off, just for my own ego's sake, yay. But also, I'm okay with being a target. I'm okay with, suffering the slings and arrows. I'm okay with that because if I can do this and I can mess with people and deal with this sort of stuff and refuse to back down and refuse to allow people to attack us in front of me, I'm going to. I have not always been the shy, delicate flower of femininity that you see in front of you. And so I'm okay with not backing down. I'm really not doing anything different. It's just that society has changed around me to the point where I am somewhat of an anomaly. I am the person who is out and proud and moving into cisgender spaces and performing in them. There really aren't a lot of trans folk that do that, who deliberately move into cisgender spaces and perform into them. And I try to do that as much as possible. One of the things I used to say about my stories is that they were transgender 101 for the cis folk. So to give them an idea of what it really is like to be transgender as opposed to the stories that you are telling yourself.
Yeah. Well, and the thing I love about Mounting Washington, while that is a component, and I know that all of those things that were happening for you at the same time as you were riding the bike and transitioning, but the story is just a story of a person overcoming the mountain. And that is, I think, really unique and kind of puts you, like you're saying, able to kind of go into those cisgender spaces and tell the story, because there's just so much universality in the story itself. But I mean, the more specific a story becomes, the more universal it becomes. So, that's happening as well. It's such a good show.
Thank you. It's all about living authentically and moving towards fear as opposed to away from it. I use that a lot now in my 988 chats. As I do my best to be as anonymous as I can in these things, because it's not really the chats are not about me. The chats are about the person that I'm talking with and trying to help them. But sometimes letting them know that there is somebody who understands what you're going through and has been through it and has been able to come out on the other side is helpful. Sometimes it's just like if I get it, especially after the transgender option was taken away from 988. So I get more queers now because there's no place else for them to go. And sometimes just telling them that I am transgender too. I've rescued more than one chat to let them know I know this. So the thing that I would tell them is that, okay, you have decisions to make. How? I don't know what decision you're going to make. That's going to be up to you. I will tell you this. There are two different ways you can make that decision. You can make it in fear or you can make it in faith. And I'm not talking about religious faith, although if you have that, a lot of people use that in their lives and find it helpful. I mean faith in yourself, that no matter what happens, when you make this decision, you will find a way to not only survive, but thrive from that decision. And then I will say every single decision that I've ever made in fear, no matter how it turned out, if I achieved the objective that I wanted with it or not, brought more fear with it. Every decision that I made with faith, even if it turned out completely different from what I wanted it to be, has given me gifts beyond measure.
That's beautiful.
Thanks.
Well, we're almost to our time. We'll go to our last question. So tell me, what has been your most interesting or awkward or fun or poignant Fringe interaction? Just a fun story.
There were two. I'm going to tell you the more fun one. This was in 2017. I was heading north back home after DC Fringe, and in a pretty sour mood because it was not a good Fringe for me. For the entire Fringe festival, my attendance was less than every other show that I'd ever performed. It was heinous, and I was in a really bad mood. And I was also traveling through central Pennsylvania, which is the bane of my traveling existence. I have been going up and down this particular stretch of road literally my entire life, 2, 3, 4, 5 times a year, my entire life, since before since I was in diapers, we've been doing this. And every single time that we have been through, I had been gone down, up and down this road, it's been under construction. And I had to pee, which was not unusual in 2000. I was on hormone replacement therapy, plus I was on spironolactone for complicated HRT reasons. But one of the things that Spiro does to you is that it increases your sense of urgency. Urgency is the medical term for needing to go to the bathroom. And so what Spiro does is it takes your urgency and makes it an emergency. And so I was traveling along this road at 80 miles an hour, and I was praying to Saint Buster, who is the patron saint of scofflaws, in case you didn't know, that there would be no cops. And because I knew that there was a Sheetz a little bit ahead of me, a couple miles up. And so I was just trying to get there. I was waiting to see this. I finally saw the sign. I took the off-ramp at like 70 miles an hour and did a four-wheel skid into the parking lot. I jump out of the car and I run into the Sheetz, and I've been there before. I know where the bathroom is, and I'm going towards the back corner, and I get in that last aisle that has the wall of coolers with glass doored coolers. And I'm going down there, and I'm like 5 or 6 steps in when I realize that there's a guy in a Pepsi uniform loading Pepsi free into one of the coolers. And I'm like, I don't think I can take the time to go around. So I just went through, and I'm like, excuse me, I'm sorry, pardon me, excuse me. And this guy in this sheet in where the hell am I, Pennsylvania, looked up at me and said, oh, hi, Penny. How is Washington? I peed a little. And then I said, I want to talk to you about this, but just give me 2.5 minutes. And I went in, I went to the bathroom. And I came back out, and we had a conversation. Apparently, his route takes him all over the Midwest and centrally, and he was in Cincinnati in June and saw me at the Cincinnati Fringe, and apparently even talked to me. And I felt embarrassed that I didn't, like I said, he wasn't wearing his Pepsi uniform while I was talking, obviously. So how could I know this guy? And so it just, we had this really great conversation, even though it was a bad Fringe. And I was like, really interesting to know that, when you actually reach somebody, you never know when it's going to come back to you. And I was like, I really like this. I want more interactions like this, more talking with people, and more having made an effect in their lives.
I love it. P-stop turns into connection.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, Penny, thank you so much for joining me today on What the Fringe. It's been such a delight to have you.
Oh, thank you. I am a delight. I mean, you're a delight.
We both are.
We're very much delightful people.
Well, Penny will be performing Mounting Washington at United Solo in New York this fall in October
22nd at 7 p.m. And then afterwards, there was like nobody scheduled after me. And they said, do you want to just like rent this and have a talkback? And I was like, I love talkbacks. That's why else I don't have to worry about like going over on my show, which is like, you give me 70 minutes, I'm going to take 75. So there's a talkback there. So you want to talk to me about this. It's hella expensive to live to do anything in New York, especially for a short period of time. But one of the things that I'm doing is there's this group called New Alternatives that is a support organization for homeless LGBTQ plus youth and young adults up to like age 30 or 32. Getting them off the streets, helping them find places to stay, get jobs, get training, all the things that you need to do to have a life. And I wanted to give them something. So if you are a friend of mine, or if you've seen my show, or you want to support me or New Alternatives, what I'm doing is, if you want to buy me tickets, go to the website. Even if you're in, Cincinnati or Minneapolis or DC, buy a ticket to my show or 2 tickets to my show and tell me they're for New Alternatives, and I will bring them to the show so they can see me in a cisgender spot, a trans woman performing in a cis festival.
I'm so excited about that. Well, that's so great. We'll have all that linked in the show notes. And you can find Penny on Instagram at Penny Sterling, and on Facebook at sterling.penny, and on bluesky. And you can also find Penny's Linktree. I'll put that in the show notes for you so that you can keep up with her and donate tickets to her show. What the Fringe is produced and hosted by me, Lauren Hantz. This episode was edited by Ben Ellis of Renowned Media, and those sweet tunes you hear provided by Paul Snyder of Orchestra of Sound. And our logo was designed by Ruby Arnold of Ruby Makes Things. What the Fringe can be found on your favorite podcast platforms and now on YouTube. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know when new episodes release, and keep up with What the Fringe on Instagram at whatthefringe_productions, and find us online at whatthefringeproductions.com. Fringe romance. It's a thing. Not always, but it does happen. But you want to watch out for red flags. If you see a really great performer and you go up to them and you're like, hey, you are an amazing storyteller, you need to run the other direction if they reply with,
Storyteller is a great word for it. Another one would be liar.